So today's topic, oh, and by the way, so you guys kind of know the purpose of this, right? So you've been on these calls before. So we're going to talk about mindset. And you guys know that my belief and sort of the foundational principle for not just these calls, but pretty much everything I do, is really just that everything begins with the mind, right? And our mind drives our health. It drives our relationships. It drives our career. It drives our money. It drives our spirituality. It really drives everything. And this is an idea that I think it's probably intuitive for most people, but it tends to be something we forget about and that we don't prioritize. And so, as I've said on the call before, when we think about being healthy and we think about being well, when we think about wellness, we generally sort of default to the physical side of it, exercise, diet. And I think those are wonderful things to focus on. But if we could just focus more on the mind, the physical part of it would be so much easier. We spend a lot of time exercising our body. We spend very little time exercising our mind and making our mind healthier. And so that's really the foundation behind everything that I'm doing. It's the foundation behind these calls. And so today's specific topic, we're going to drill into positivity. And, we have all heard about positivity, talked about for years and years and years. If I go back to like the 90s, when I was young, I was thinking, you'd hear about positivity in the context of, the power of positivity, right? It's kind of a phrase you would hear. And back in those days, I was of the mindset that I would scoff at that. That was like for the hippies, for like the woo-woo, people. And but the thing is now, though, is there's actually science behind it. So even those of us who, I tend to be a little bit more right-brained than I ever was before, but even those of us who still are analytical and need to see the data and oriented to science, the good news is that there are studies, there is data, there is science to support the idea of the power of positivity. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So, our mind, as I've sort of hinted, it will expand to the vision that we set for ourselves, right? So there's really no limit to what we can accomplish, but what we have are blocks. We have limiting beliefs, we have preconceived ideas, we have programming from our parents and from our teachers and from our environment that limits our thinking, and that limited thinking manifests in our life in a limited way. One sort of thought I want to plant for you guys is this idea that human potential is unlimited. And I think it's more important than ever for us to appreciate that idea and for us to do something with it now more than ever, because just look around. While there's a lot of great things happening in the world today, there's also a lot of not great things happening in the world today. There's a lot of doomsayers out there who are predicting that, we're close to some kind of an end or an apocalypse, or society is deteriorating, like all these sorts of things. And I don't know how much truth there is to that. But what I do know is that we are underperforming our potential. And I think what happens is that we get so clogged up with all of these limitations that we end up in a state where we're just maintaining. We're barely able to keep up. We're doing the best that we can, and we're all sort of different levels. Some of us have great lives and are totally happy, others aren't. But even the people who are living great lives and who are overachieving or high performing in a certain area, I would challenge them and I would say, are you high performing in all areas of your life? And then once you're high performing in all areas of your life, are you then taking the extra step and contributing back? What are you contributing to the society? Because unfortunately, I think we're at a point where we have relied on the institutions, we have relied on the governments, we've relied on the corporations to get us through. And where are we? We're not much further advanced than we were 200 years ago before the Industrial Revolution. We're experiencing a lot of the same problems. Yes, we've had many advances. Of course, there's been lots of technology. There's been advances in medical science and so on and so forth. Our lifespan, even though it's actually deteriorating in the last couple of years compared to 200 years ago, yes, we are living longer, right? But we still have many of the same issues. And my belief is that it is because we are underperforming our potential. So my goal is to help everybody that I can to remove those limitations, to get to basically disintegrate those things that are holding us back, so that we get to a state where not only are we performing where we want to in all areas of our life, but we also still have additional capacity beyond that to give back. Because that is the only way I believe that we're going to get through all of the issues that we have, all the problems that we have. It seems to me that if we were operating at our potential, all the problems that we perceive would go away, would be easy to solve. So part of this is to come back to positivity, because I think that's a big part of it. is more positive thinking is going to open up your capacity. Now, there is a theory that I want to propose to you called let me share my screen. This is called the broaden and build theory. And this is a theory that was proposed, I believe she is a scientist, by the name of, let me get to it. Let's see, sorry, bear with me 1 second. Okay, here we go. So some of you might be familiar with this. This is a theory called the broaden and build theory, proposed back in the 90s by Barbara Fredrickson. It was published in the Review of General Psychology, and she posits basically that positive emotions can have the effect of broadening your awareness and your response to events, as well as building resiliency and coping skills, right? So that's kind of the technical way of putting it. But the easy way to think about it is negative thoughts are correlated with tunnel vision. Positive thoughts are correlated with broad vision. Okay, so that's a very simple thing. And there is, again, science behind this. There have been numerous studies after she published this in 1998 that basically support it. So peer-reviewed studies that have, they did experiments and they were able to prove it. So what they found is that more positive emotions and positive thinking was correlated with people's ability to think more unusually, flexibly, and creatively. Okay, so unusually, flexibly, and creatively, while also being more open-minded. So this is the idea of you have a broader, you're able to see more different options, right? You're able to see things from different perspectives. You have fewer blocks and fewer sort of blind spots in the way that you look at what's happening around you and the way that you are able to think about the things that happen and analyze the things that happen. They also found that positive emotions facilitate an expanded area of attention. So this is the broad vision idea. So when you're positively thinking, your field of vision, you have more peripheral vision, right? It's broader. Negative thinking is more, focused and laser focused, like a tunnel. And I can get into sort of why I think this is true, and I'll explain a little bit about the stress response. I believe it goes back to, the evolutionary stress response. So the last thing to point out here is that they say that those experiencing positive emotions appear to be better able to focus on a big picture as opposed to small details, compared to those who are primed to experience negative or neutral emotions. Okay, so let's think a little bit about why this is true. Their stress response, so fear, the fight or flight response, is been with humans for a long period of time when we needed to respond to a danger, right? So what happens biologically inside the body is that effectively the core systems in the body that you need to respond to the danger become activated. So the blood flow, the concentration of blood flow goes overwhelmingly to those systems, right? So your muscles, for example, so that you can run faster, right? So the areas in your system that are required to avoid the danger get the attention, whereas the quote unquote unessential systems in the body do not, right? So your digestion, for example, would be unessential in the case of running from a tiger. So the digestion gets a little bit less attention in the case of a stressful situation. What that does to the brain, when you are running from a tiger, you need to be laser focused on the tiger, right? So this stress response, which has hormones associated with it, such as cortisol and adrenaline, is going to be correlated to narrowing your field of view. This makes sense? Yes? When you are not in the stress response, that field of view is not narrowed, right? So your positive thinking or your non-stress hormones, such as dopamine, and I'm blanking on others, but basically these happy hormones are associated with a broader field of vision. So to me, this is a much more scientific sort of biological way of understanding the idea that negativity is associated with tunnel vision, whereas positivity is associated with broader vision. Okay, I'm going to pause there, ask if there's any questions. Does it make sense what I'm saying so far?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
It does, but it also, if you have the positive look, even if you're being attacked by a tiger, you'll see more options open to you other than running.
Right.
Or running just wildly and not finding a better path. So
Right. Right. Very true. Yeah. So you can think more creatively, creatively, right?
creatively.
Creatively, better able to solve problems, right? Yes, totally true. And then the other, I'm glad you said that because you just prompted me to make one more point, which is, so having said all of that about the stress response and the evolutionary stress response, I also would ask you to consider the following. Our best scientists, or I guess the best scientific know-how, knowledge, theorizing today says that Homo sapiens have been around for about 300,000 years, right? Now that number has changed over time. They've revised it numerous times, right? I guess some of the latest people are saying that Homo sapiens may have been around as long as 1,000,000 years, but I think the general consensus in the scientific community is 300,000 years. Okay. So for 300,000 years, we survived without a whole lot of major change, meaning the rate of evolutionary change was pretty constant for a really long time. Okay, there was a couple of big things that happened in there. We started cooking with fire, for example, and then there was agriculture. Those were the two big things. And then fast forward to about 200 years ago, 150-ish years ago, we hit the Industrial Revolution. Okay, now the rate of change during the last 200 years compared to the prior 298,800 years, check my math, much higher, right? A lot higher. So many big changes happen in a very, very short period of time. We humans have not had time enough to evolve to our current environmental conditions. So our biology is still, physiology is still operating the way it was prior to 200 years ago. We haven't been able to catch up. So that negativity association with the fight or flight situation still remains, right? We're still in that state. So in order to get out of that state, we need to take proactive steps, right? We need to forcibly use our tools to avoid that sort of default that we have of negativity, because we no longer need to run from tigers. That's a thing of the past, but our biology hasn't caught up yet. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen one more time, and I'm going to give you 9 little tools, or 9 big tools, I guess, depending on your perspective, on how to be more positive. And I think I can find them here eventually. Okay. Sharing the screen one more time, and here we go. Okay, so 9 tools for more positivity. Everybody able to see that in your life? Okay, so number 1, where's number 1? Come on, there we go. So moving from negative to positive thoughts. Okay, so this is the idea that get yourself into the practice of catching your positive thoughts. So it's almost like we talked, I think a couple of calls ago, we talked about this idea of a radar, right? So you've got this sort of radar keeping track of your thinking. And when you're mindful about your thinking, as opposed to ignorant about your thinking, right? You put some awareness to it, just like you would put awareness to taking care of your physical health. We're now in a state where we're taking care of our mental health as well. We've got this radar going, watching out for negative thoughts. The negative thought shows up. What do? Okay, you catch it and you turn it into a positive thought, right? So one thing you might do is write it down. When you catch yourself having a negative thought, write it down. And then in response to it, write down 3 positive thoughts. And this is based on the idea that I think is probably loosely based on some kind of a science, that it takes 3 positive thoughts to effectively undo every negative thought. Okay. So you guys have probably heard this sort of thing before, right? Sometimes they say it takes 7, sometimes it's 9, whatever it is. So for every negative thought that you have, even if you don't write it down, take a moment to think 3 positive thoughts. And you can even turn that negative into a positive, right? So maybe it is you're having an interaction with somebody and they irritate you or they do something that you don't like. And rather than go to that negative, catch yourself in that negative, turn around to the positive, something like, I really love that person, right? Whoever it is, I love that person. That person must be having a bad day. What can I do to make that person's life better? Turn it into those positive thoughts. And again, it sounds like it might be a lot initially, but as I've said before, these things become much easier once you turn them into a habit. The number 2 is gratitude journal. And of course, we've all heard about gratitude journal, but I want to say a little bit about this that maybe you haven't heard before. So there is science that supports the idea that writing something down is more correlated to change in the chemistry of the brain than simply speaking it, or even more so than typing it into a computer. There's something about the act of writing something down that triggers brain chemistry more so than any other way of having the thought or expressing the thought. So hence the effectiveness of gratitude journal. Now, one other thing I want to say about this is I recently watched a video that was done by Andrew Huberman, who is a neuroscientist out of Stanford. You guys may know Huberman. I follow him. He's great. He publishes a lot on social media. And he said that there is even a more effective way to put yourself in a state of gratitude than to keep a journal. And that is to appreciate the gratitude of other people. So when you're keeping a gratitude journal, which by all means you should do this, you're thinking about your own gratitude, things that you're grateful for, right? I have used gratitude journal. It has been effective for me 100%. But he argues, well, that's great. Taking some time to sit in the gratitude of others is even more powerful. So the examples he gives are, you might go and watch a video of an interview of, say, a Holocaust survivor, where the Holocaust survivor is talking about how they were saved or how they were pulled out of the situation, how it is the circumstances around their story, and listen to their gratitude. And he says that, sitting in that gratitude is extremely powerful. He also suggests to appreciate the gratitude that other people have for you. So you might go to your family members or to your loved ones and say, what is it that, I do for you? What do you love about me? Actually be so bold as to ask that and have them express the gratitude that they have for you. These are ways to really get, sort of hyper effective in that feeling of gratitude. And of course, I don't have to explain to you why gratitude is a positive thought or how, what there is chemistry behind it, because it is triggering those happy hormones. And it is going to be, when practiced regularly, very effective at just setting your mind in the right place and putting you in a more positive mood. Okay, so now we have this idea of positive emotion flooding. So this is pretty similar to number one. So positive emotion flooding is just sort of overwhelming yourself in positive thought, right? So for instance, my job as a coach and having a conversation with a client would be to, every time something negative comes in, I'm going to give them like a bunch of positivity, right? I'm going to show them how to turn those negatives into positive at a very, at high volume, right? So high volume positivity is going to, again, help sort of train the brain to default to positive thinking rather than to negative thinking. You can do this yourself. You can have other people do it for you. You can get into a practice with the people that live in your house, your family members, who do it for each other. It's just get into that positive state. Here's another one, is spotting success in a timeline. So this is about sort of kind of going back in your history and reflecting on and appreciating those successes that you've had in your life in the past. And to refresh your memory on the positive feelings associated with those successes in your life, right? So for me, it might be not just my own successes, but maybe your children's successes, right? I think everybody here has children, right? So think about your children's successes and those happy moments that you had, and then reflect on that, and then let yourself actually feel the emotions associated with those memories, right? So it's not just a fleeting thought. It's not just, oh, do you remember when? For me, what's really effective is I go back and look at pictures, because there's a high degree of correlation between emotion and the visual, right? So I am much better at feeling the emotion associated with the memory when I look at the picture, more so than just having the thought of the memory. So go back and sit in those happy moments and remind yourself of the emotions associated with them. And that really does a good job of putting you in that positive state. Very effective. This one I like a lot too. So experiencing awe. So for me, awe is in the mountains. The mountains are my happy place. My kids and I, especially my son, loves to hike. And so when I experience hiking in the mountains and I get to the peak of the trail or whatever it is, the summit, and I'm looking down and I'm experiencing this, the mountains in the foreground and the sky in the background, that's my moment of awe. And every time I'm in that place, I'm overcome with those happy thoughts, with those happy hormones. And so it doesn't have to be in the mountains, it's whatever your happy place is, right? So meditation, so the experiencing of awe can come through meditation. It can actually even come through psychedelics, which is probably a dangerous thing for me to say these days still, right? But you're probably aware that there is a lot of research going on. There's even clinical drug trials studying the effectiveness of psychedelics and that experience. There's even we're probably within a year or so of some particular psychedelics getting FDA approval, for use in certain situations. And so there are ways to get to that experience of awe, and it is very powerful. The magic wand. Okay, this is the idea of imagine to yourself that you had a magic wand. So if you could create whatever you wanted to create, what would you do? Right. So you can incorporate this into a gratitude journal. You can put this into conversations around the dinner table, right? Like with I've got my kids are still relatively young, so it would be fun for us to talk about what would you do if you had a magic wand, and just have the thinking going into a positive experience, right? Again, this is just a way to practice being in a positive mindset, as opposed to a negative one. So daydreaming is a really effective tool. So this is effectively the same idea, but allow yourself to daydream, right? And even one way to sort of think about this is when you're daydreaming, try to put it in the form of a story. So rather than daydream, I tend to daydream with quick, fleeting thoughts, and I tend to think of it as kind of in the form of lists, right? So if I'm thinking about the future, if I'm thinking about my coaching practice, for example, if I'm thinking about the change I want to make in the world, I will tend to do it in short sort of thoughts that are fleeting, right? But much more effective than that is to slow that thinking down and sort of tell them in the form of a story, right? Which forces you to sort of sit in the emotions and sit in the thoughts a little bit longer, which again is it's just like working the muscle with repetition, right? So this is a way of staying in those ideas for a longer period of time to get them really coded into your brain patterns, your thought patterns. Another one I really like is to read an autobiography. So all of us have people that we admire, right? We all have people in history that were movers and shakers, that created great things, that whom we admire. And so one really good way to do this is to go back, read an autobiography from one of your favorite people, and think for a minute, what's really different about me versus them, right? And when you spend some time thinking about that, what you may find is there's probably really not a whole lot different, right? It's not like there are these people who created great things that had autobiographies. Their underlying skills, were they very different from your own underlying skills, right? There were circumstances, there were mindsets that might be different. So what you will find though is, so for example, like Albert Einstein might be one of my favorites, Benjamin Franklin, another one of my favorites. These were great men that did great things. Am I very much different? Am I so different from them that I couldn't also achieve great things? And what you will probably find is that the answer is no. So that's a good way to put your mind in the right positive place. And then the last one is really just to get bored. And especially with kids is, I try to emphasize this a lot in my own household, is to just allow yourself to be bored. My kids hate to be bored, and they're always wanting, guidance from Heather and I to find something to do, right? They're looking for us to create it for them. But really, if you can just sit in boredom for a little bit, and it's not just true for kids, it's true for us also. Sitting in boredom gives your brain the time to think and to do all the things I just talked, all the things above on the screen, right? So if you're bored, you can daydream. If you're bored, you can you can have visions of the magic wand. You can do positive emotion flooding. You can do all these things. One thing that'll help you to get bored is to put the phone down. By the way, just a little tip: take the phone, put it down, right? Because the phone is occupying your brain probably in ways that you don't want it to be occupied. So allow yourself to get bored and to sit in that positive stuff.